Hello and welcome to our launch party for Dark Hearts, All These Subtle Deceits by C.S. Humble. I always say humble, but it is humble.
Right.
Seth, I'm sorry. And I just want to welcome everyone here. I want to welcome anyone who is tuning in right now and joining us for our party. I want to thank our special guests for joining us. Author Catherine McCarthy. Hi, Catherine.
Hi.
And author Laird Barron. Hello, Laird. I definitely want to kick this thing off with just kind of some housekeeping. Nightworms is gracious. My company that I co-own was gracious enough to platform this for us and host this live party. So I just wanted to thank Nightworms for doing that, and also the chat is open for anyone to drop in and ask any questions or talk directly to anyone who's hanging out here. Already there's people popping in and joining us for that party. That is definitely what that's there for. Like, please dialogue, please ask questions. That's awesome. If there's any troublemakers in there, I will 100% throw you out. So do not be annoying or rude in the chat or you are gone. And that's it for housekeeping. But I just want to open the floor to Seth first to kind of introduce yourself. And then we will go with Laird and Catherine, and you can talk about, your relationship to this particular book and to Seth, how you met Seth. But we'll go ahead and go with you, Seth.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody being here. Most of you do not know me. I am a relatively obscure Houstonian author. But I've been writing for a long time now, professionally for just about a decade. Sadie has been very supportive of the Blackwell's novels, which is what we're going to be talking about today. I'm a pretty simple guy. I'm just trying to write the very best stories possible, and do it in a way that's meaningful. Specifically, right now for spiritual horror, which is clearly prevalent in the Blackwell series. So that's me, and I'm obviously here with two incredibly talented authors, and I would love to hear from both of them. Catherine.
Amazing. Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine McCarthy. I think I know everyone who's popped up so far. I'm sure there'll be new people to me, though. Laird is new to me as well. I'm the author of Immortelle. I've known Sadie for a few years now on social media, and she has been amazing to me and so many people. I've only known Seth for possibly, just a few months, I think. Mm-hmm. But I had the pleasure of reading the two Blackwell's books that are, coming out today and the one that's due out in December. And they're both amazing. And then I have my own book coming out with Dark Hart next year.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I'm definitely going to talk about that later.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Laird Barron here. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Sadie and Nightworms for putting this on, and for Seth for asking me to be on the celebratory debut of his novel. And I'm an author of horror, noir, and crime, and I've known Seth for almost pretty close to 7 years now. And I've actually read, I would say, the vast majority of your work, Seth.
You've read everything I've ever written. Yeah,
over the years, and I actually think that this, you were talking about off camera, you were talking about kind of the core, the spirituality, of this particular series. And it's something that kind of runs through a lot of your work, but this is the most manifest version of it that I've seen. And for everybody out there, you're going to get to know a lot more about Seth over the years, especially with this series, but with more stuff that's going to be coming out. And he writes Westerns, he writes urban fantasy, sort of post-apocalyptic or side magic realist, side streaming, time traveling kind of science fiction and horror. And this is the first just overtly kind of Blatty-esque occult, in that tradition, the Wheatley Blatty tradition, or Ray Russell, those guys. And I feel like we're in for a treat to see how you sort of carry that torch forward into the darkness.
I appreciate that.
I love that Blatty-esque. Seth, it definitely has that vibe for me too. I remember reading The Exorcist not that long ago, just a couple of years ago, and it was just a spiritual like experience for me, much like All These Subtle Deceits.
Yeah, there is. So I feel like Blatty's work, it hits so hard because the prose of it, especially with The Exorcist, there is a pervasive sense of tragedy that goes along with spiritualism. And one of the things Blatty was so impressionable when I was reading The Exorcist. I don't know. I think I read The Exorcist in my mid-20s, and I was going through sort of a crisis of faith. I had been a minister in the church, in the Christian church, for a while, and so I began to disabuse myself with a lot of the toxic theology that comes out of American Baptist life in the United States. And there's an enormous sense of homophobia, Islamophobia, xenophobia. And these were all things that were incongruous with what I feel like religion and truth and love are about. And I'll never forget, when I was reading Blatty's The Exorcist, there's a scene where the housekeeper goes to visit his daughter, who we come to find is not actually dead, as the previously had been established in the narrative, but she is actually addicted to drugs. And he goes to give her money. And I'll never forget, there's an incredible line that stuck with me from Blatty, where he says that, and when he saw the ruined face of his daughter buried alive under 1,000 hotel rooms, like this sort of sense that even though we can have a great sense of love and compassion for the people who matter the most to us, those relationships are oftentimes very hard on us. And that's one of the things I try to incorporate in Blackwell's, is that relationships, love is hard. And so I appreciate the, referencing Blatty, because I am trying to do something that I feel like has been missing since Blatty fell out of the major popular streams, because the movie has now become so much more popular than the novel itself. And the novel is a triumph that time will only continue to glorify. So I appreciate the reference to Blatty.
I definitely noticed the similarity. I told you that in my review, but I also felt that you did something fresh with it. It wasn't, a sort of copy of The Exorcist, and it is really nice to see some possession horror coming back into the forefront, as you say.
Just if I could just add one thing, you and I were, Seth, we were talking about briefly, it was like a month or two ago, and you mentioned something. We had mentioned Blatty, and my comparison to Catherine's point is that it really isn't similar stylistically at all, and obviously the plot's different and all that. It's simply of a vein or a thread that you're kind of pulling on. But you said something, I remember it, I was very intrigued by it. Basically, that Christianity, the Judeo-Christianity is sort of the axis with which a lot of modern horror, especially in the 70s and 80s, sort of traveled along. And I think that that imprint is still sort of the signpost of a lot of commercial horror. But you were talking about going all the way back to like renovating it, like actually not just sort of kind of going farther and farther out into the darkness or out into the weeds and inventing new genres or seeing where the frontiers are, but no, going back and renovating that old crumbling mansion that has been it's occasionally we look over our shoulder at it, but it's way back there in the rear view. So I thought that was fascinating because it kind of points to sort of an intentionality of where your series is going to go after this book.
Yeah, and that's absolutely the case. I think there's a considerable amount of horror that comes out that directs itself towards spiritualism, and Christianity has made itself inaccessible. It has made itself an axe instead of a plowshare, and I think that you know, in one particular review that Sadie was so kind to help get for me, that's actually for Prospect, which all the Prospect around us, which is the second book in the series, is that I do approach Christianity and spiritualism from an older place that is not, it's these people, just because they are creatures of faith, does not mean that they are good. It does not mean that that there's going to be a host of angels come down and everything's going to be okay. But it's to look at it from a progressive sense of, what does it mean to have faith? Who has ownership of truth, if anyone? And one of the biggest problems with any current novel that I've read that has overtly Christian themes in it is that it treats it with rose-colored glasses instead of an iron hand and a velvet glove. And I think that that's something that's very important, is to not take it, or to take itself seriously enough to be critical of itself. I think that's incredibly important moving forward with spiritual horror. But again, that's me. So, and there are other people who do it other ways, and that's absolutely, those stories matter as well.
No, I love that, Seth, because as somebody who's been deconstructing their faith since 2019, but specifically in 2020, and just coming to a place where I don't even want to identify as a Christian or a person of faith or a believer because of what that means in our society today, I think it's extremely important to see myself in stories like what you're writing, because William Daniels, even though he has faith and relies on it, he's also, like you said, not technically a good person in the way that most heroes are. He's flawed, he gets frustrated, he cusses, he
he sure as fucking does.
Yeah. And I mean, I see myself in that because I've always been that way. I've been an outcast in the evangelical church, sitting in the pew being like, I'm not gonna compromise on these things that I believe are true, even if you tell me that they're true. Like, I feel like I should love everyone. I feel like all of these people are accepted. I feel like I can have a tattoo. I feel like I can pierce my fucking nose if I want to. Like, I've always been distant from what I felt was trying to make me conform to. So absolutely. I feel like your work is really important. It was important to me. Hence why it's the first novel I'm
hence why
publishing.
it's the first one you're publishing. So, and I would love for people to know, like, how did Dark Hart come about? Like, what was your process like? Like, how did you move forward into this? Because our stories now are inextricably tied to one another because you're my first major publisher.
Yeah. So it's interesting because you, when we first met, have always told me, well, you're going to be publishing horror. And I was always like, no, I'm a curator of horror. I like to review horror. I like to read it. I like to talk about it. I don't want to publish it. That sounds exhausting. But then in having met Rob Carroll at Dark Matter, doing our anthology and different partnerships that he and I have had with Nightworms, he just asked me kind of like out of the blue on the phone, like, what would you think about having an imprint, with Dark Matter? We'll be the parent company, you be an acquiring editor. And I thought, that's kind of everything, because he already has an infrastructure. I don't need to build that. And it takes away some of the risk. And yeah, well, I want to do that. There's so much out there that I think needs to be published that never gets to, like reading your stuff, Seth. Like Seth sent me his fantasy novel, The Threadbare Prince, to read. And I fell in love with his storytelling voice. And I was like, who are you? Who are you really? Because I feel like you're a famous author who's trying to dupe me and pull one over on me in reading this.
Right.
So yeah, it just kind of snowballed from there into where we are right now, which is I like your stuff and now it's out there. I want people to read it.
Thank you so much.
The cover is awesome, by the way.
Oh, Sadie, talk about the cover. Talk about the cover.
I just sorry to interrupt. I wanted before it got lost. I just would really like to praise you guys for not only the art but the design. I think it really, really is lovely.
Yeah, that's all Sadie. And Sadie, if you want to talk about the artist who was so wonderful.
I love more.
There's this question from Eric that I think we can piggyback off of. He said, will the Dark Hearts edition differ from the Ghoulish edition? Yes, it absolutely will. We did want to keep the cover because it ties so closely to the book, which was done by Matthew Revert. If you're familiar with Matthew Revert, we gave him sort of, the trajectory of the spiritual aspects of the book and where we saw it kind of like heading into, and he definitely put his spin on it, his artistic value to it, which was incredible. And then it will be different because it includes a bonus story that I think people are going to go nuts over. It's The Crusade of the Black Cross, which is, Seth, you talk about it.
Right. So there was originally a call where they wanted to have classic horror mixed with 1980s sort of coming of age films. So they thought that would be a great mashup. And so I worked up this story because I've always loved Edgar Allan Poe's work, especially The Mask of the Red Death. That's my favorite Poe story. And what I realized was that Poe's work really needed a sequel, and what it needed to have in it were the Goonies as 16th century knights.
Yes.
And so I had this idea where all of the Goonies would be in this retinue, and they would go and they would find the castellated abbey of Prince Prospero after the events of The Mask of the Red Death. And I wanted the 1980s coming of age films deal so presciently with what it means to grow up in friendship and how important friendships are and how we subsist through those other people that become so important in our lives. And then I got to put a bunch of spooky stuff in there. I got to write in Poe's style, which is one of my favorite things. I would be remiss to say that. So one of the other aspects to the new edition is that it was edited by Marissa Van Uden. She also edited and worked with me on The Crusade of the Black Cross. And Marissa is by a large margin the best editor I've ever worked with. And I'm so fortunate that she is a part of the Dark Hart team, a part of the Dark Matter magazine team. And I just couldn't, people who read the new edition of the book will find a deeper, clearer picture of what I was trying to convey in the first edition of the book, all because of her hard work.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
And I see that she is here, and
yes, she's here.
And I love that. So yeah, that's The Crusade of the Black Cross. I really love that story. It's not very long. I think it's only around 3,200 words, maybe. But it let me dig into some of those themes that I love writing like I'm living in the 19th century.
Yeah.
So it's one of my favorite things.
I sent that story to my parents because I knew that they would love it. And they both wrote back like these glowing reviews. Who is that? Sadie, who is this? Do they have books like this? And I was like, no, this is just a short story, but he will have books You will have books.
I do want to do something in that vein down the road, but first I owe Mother Horror 3 more books. So I've got to do those first.
Catherine, I wanted to get your take on you read All These Subtle Deceits, and you also read the second book, correct?
I did, and I did them in the wrong order because Seth sent me the book 2 first, didn't you? And I started reading it, and then Sadie sent me book 1. So I thought, right, I know this is completely backwards, but I need to finish book 2 first and then go back, which is why I think I kept you on pins, Seth, because I didn't come back to you for about 2 weeks because I was determined. I needed to finish the 2 of them. I sort of felt like they definitely work as a standalone, but yeah, definitely. You wouldn't need to read both. But because I had the 2, I really wanted to get that sort of feeling for Blackwell's and build up more of an impression before coming back to you. So I think I had you on pins there for a bit.
Well, I wanted you to love it. I loved your book so much.
Did.
Yeah, of course, I wanted you to like it because I liked your work so much.
And some of the things I like, most of all, were the fact that your characters are fully fleshed out, but they're also flawed. And I'm a total sucker for flawed characters, definitely. And that's the crux of the appeal for me. And I also really like the fact that you couldn't pin down the time frame. It's obvious that you're in the modern world, but it incorporates so much of the ancient that I like that old feel as well, because like you, I like writing about the past, or as if I'm in 19th century, 20th century. So it made the supernatural elements even more believable for me, having those elements of the ancient in there.
I'm so glad. That makes me so happy.
I actually just finished Laird's. So it's interesting. My eyes keep drifting over to Laird because I just finished The Croning, and I was like a little fucked up after reading it.
So good.
And I think it's awesome that Laird is. Would you say that he's mentoring you? Seth?
Without question.
Okay.
Has, yeah.
So I think it's interesting that somebody who builds religion and culty crazy shit is influencing and mentoring your work. Laird, can you tell us why you're so weird?
And wonderful.
What's going on in your brain?
You had publicly commented about reading The Croning, and you had talked about the first chapter, which is essentially a prologue. But I was just going to say I'm actually working on novellas and a novel set in that exact setting, so it'll get weirder. But I don't really know how to answer the question, but I can tell you that bad childhood probably had something to do with it. My mom was extraordinarily fundamentalist Christian. That has given me I'm a born again atheist now, but actually I think atheism is probably the wrong way to describe my philosophy. I'm more Hamlet. There are things undreamt of in Seth or Sadie's or Catherine or my philosophies, but I certainly don't believe in I don't have any faith in organized religion whatsoever. Yeah. And it gives me a very interesting, but I understand how it works because I was raised in the blood. Yeah. And so it's funny because some of my closer friends and people who have been extraordinarily supportive of my work are hardcore, faithful, devout Christians. And so like I said, some of the people I admire most in the world had great relationships with. Actually, for years and years, I had a sort of a fatherly relationship with a martial arts instructor who really helped me kind of square my act away when I was in my late 20s. And he, I was an atheist by then, and he was a hardcore, devout, fundamentalist Christian, and he had no problem with that. And we just were friends. And so I really do value that kind of, that strange, almost like opposites attract sort of situation, because the real Christian will try to save you without ever letting you know they're trying to save you. And I really do appreciate that.
That's
right.
what's going on in your writing relationship with Laird. You're just trying to, like put the stuff in there for Laird.
I think maybe that's secretly what's going on. But no, but in all seriousness, we've known each other for at least 7 years now, and I've read a lot of his stuff. I've given him feedback on a few things. We've had long conversations on the phone. I'm not in a position to do it all the time. So over the years, at least 2 or 3 people a year, I try to, if they approach me, and I'm able to do it, I try to help. But Phil Fracassi and Seth Humble and Scott Nicolay were 3 people that fellow writers that I've worked with over the years, and I'm really proud of the tremendous success that they've all had. I mean, Phil is just killing it. Scott Nicolay, is a great talent, and he's had great success. And of course, now I'm watching Seth, who I think I've always said that Phil, of all the writers I know, Phil is one of the hardest working writers up there. I mean, even more so than somebody like Stephen Graham Jones, who is like a machine. But nobody can really, that I've ever met, can compete with Phil. He's like on Harlan Ellison level as far as like completing projects and getting them out there, and just taking the blows that you get trying to submit and publish. And by the way, for everybody submitting, it gets worse. Actually, it doesn't get better. But because now you get judged by everybody. It's one thing being judged by the occasional publisher, editor. Once you get out there, you're judged against yourself for everything you've ever done and ever will do. But the point is that I've had a really great time working with Seth and watching him grow as a writer. But also just slowly, now I'm starting to see from the outsider perspective, everybody else sort of catching up to what I've known for a long time. And like Sadie, you said it, I was kind of smiling when you were talking about it earlier when you read the Threadbare Prince. Oh, who is this guy? Right. I don't know. I think I've told Seth that over the years. Just be patient.
Right.
Just keep doing it. And the thing is, it's all you can do as an aspiring writer. It's all you can do when you're published. You're going to have your highs and lows, and if you want to be published, all you can do is just keep doing it. And I think the biggest mistake anybody ever makes is they stop.
They quit. Yeah.
And if that's your thing, that's fine. I mean, if you're tired of it, you're tired of it. But when it comes to, and I'm not talking about writing, I'm talking about publishing, you just have to keep grinding, and you may be rewarded, you may not. But Seth is getting his due, his just desserts, as they say.
Yeah, and honestly, he's a maniac too.
Oh well, I should finish my thought. Seth is right in there with, he is literally a machine as far as being able to consistently write, consistently polish, consistently submit, shrug off the rejections, vent them in private, and then regroup, reload, and go back out and do it again. That is, it sounds simple. It is actually very simple, but it's as difficult to do over the years to keep that. We always called it the fire. You keep a little fire burning in your belly, like in martial arts or dog mushing or whatever. Any kind of activity that requires, you will never achieve greatness without incremental progress every day and consistently over the course of many, many years. And that is why most people take a writing course and they quit. They stop reading when they get out of college, even though they long to be a novelist all through their youth. They go to a martial arts class for 6 weeks. They go to the gym for 6 weeks. It's all easy. All these things they're very different, but they're all the same in the sense that they all require commitment to achieve any kind of long-term result. But it's very hard to do the work that is required, because in the case of Seth, you're sitting at a typewriter or a word processor or with your quill and your ink pot, scratching away, and mostly to silence and to rejection. So, yeah, Seth, that's been my takeaway from working with the people that I've worked with. A lot of people over the years, and the most successful writers that I've worked with, publishing wise, and well, even just as pure writers, like achieving growth, have always listened to criticism and been able to accept it when it makes sense to them, as opposed to being defensive about it. I believe it or not, a lot of people approach me and I give everybody the same advice. Okay, here's where it's wrong, in my opinion. Here's what's wrong with it. Well, you'd be surprised how few people want to hear that. And Seth and Phil Fracassi and Scott Nicolay and a few other people I've worked with, they embraced the pain and turned it to their advantage over the years.
And I appreciate that. Laird has always been, he's always given me, the saying is like the wounds of a friend are better than the kisses of the enemy. Right. And Laird has always been forthright with me. And I wanted to circle back something that you said, Sadie, because something that's very meaningful to me. About 6 years ago, I believe it was about 6, maybe 5.5, Laird was on his book tour for his Isaiah Coleridge series. And he, we had talked a little bit on the phone, and we had the opportunity to sit together for a time while I was giving him a ride back to his hotel. And we were talking. And we both knew, like I knew Laird's position on faith, and Laird, I've always been forthright about my position. And I'll never forget that Laird told me this wonderful story about a Japanese swords maker we were talking about the Meiji Tokugawa era of high classical romantic, the samurai period. And he told me this wonderful story about a sword maker who is working on the mountain, and he's, doing his craft, and then along comes this younger person who says, teach me the way how to make these swords. And this happens after events of the narrative where he won't do it, then he will do it, then he won't do it, then he will do it, but eventually he teaches him. And then when the student leaves, the master goes right back to making the sword that he began to make before the student arrived. And I'll never forget that. It's one of the things that Laird said to me is he said, and then the sword maker passes away doing the thing that he loved to do after having passed it on. And I remember Laird saying, he said, and that's the beautiful thing that awaits us all. And for me, that is the primary opposites attract statement for our friendship, in that Laird and I both agree that there is a beautiful thing that awaits us all. We simply do not align on what that beautiful thing is, but we can both agree that the human experience, that the people that are in our lives, there is indefinitely, whether I'm wrong or Laird is right, is that in the end, there is a beautiful thing that awaits us all in this equality. And I'll never forget that. It was one of the primary moments when Laird's wisdom and having worked so long on his craft, I realized that's what I want. I want to be able to elicit the type of beauty that Laird is able to express in his work. It's something I've also found in Catherine's work in just reading one of her novels, and I'm ready to read the rest of them. Both of these people have an explicit quality. For Laird, one of the things I've never found an equal in Laird's ability to treat landscape and nature as though it is a character, more than a character, a predator that is as dangerous as the characters residing within his books, and of which there are many dangerous characters residing in all of his work. And it is that ability to conjure what Jack London was able to accomplish one time in To Build a Fire, to talk about the brutal teeth of nature. Laird is able to do in every single story. It is what sets him apart in my estimation, that in his incredible cosmology. And in the same way with Catherine's work in the book that she's going to be coming out with Dark Hart. And I know we haven't done like the full thing for her yet, and I cannot wait for it, because Catherine is able to convey greater potentially than any other writer that I have ever experienced a spectrum of color and setting that it may have peers, but it very rarely will find equals. And so to the both of them, if you haven't read, and again, to circle back to Sadie, if you haven't read The Croning, you should go back and read The Croning. My favorite Laird Barron story it's a tie between two. It's going to be Shiva, Open Your Eye, and Frontier Death Song, which are my two favorites of Laird's.
And you made me read the latter.
I did. Frontier Death Song is, it's a masterpiece. It should be in every single person who wants to be a writer. You should have to read that.
Yeah, it's great. It's
tremendous. And I cannot wait for people to see what Catherine is going to show them through the window, through a deconstruction of character that ultimately becomes a construction of a window. That is, I cannot wait for you people to see it. Like, I'm trying not to give too much away about it. I was very grateful to be able to read it, Catherine.
Is it okay? So Catherine, what is it called? And is it a novel, a novella? You said it's a
mosaic. Novella, yeah. It's called Mosaic.
Okay.
It's basically based on a stained glass window in an old abandoned church in the woods. But the stained glass, well, the whole church has been derelict, vandalized. And my main character is a stained glass artist who was commissioned to try and piece this window back together again. But there's a lot more to the window than
yes, Catherine, there is so much more.
I'll tell you,
I can't wait.
Really,
that's freaky. Next year.
Okay. Yeah, next year. Something really freaky, but hand on heart, the truth. I was sitting here writing, and Sadie and Seth will know this bit of the book, where the crow, and I often feature birds in my books. It's a bit of a joke, but the crow was tapping its beak. The crow is thank you, Tim. The crow is very, very sort of important character, so to speak, in Mosaic, and it was tapping its beak on the church window. Do you remember that bit towards the end?
Yeah, I remember it.
Tapping is because he wants her to come outside. I wouldn't say what's outside, but you know what I mean. And I was sitting here literally going through that section, and I could hear a tapping sound, and I am literally within arm's reach of my window there. And I looked, and there was a magpie on my windowsill tapping its beak. I really wish I had my phone to take a photo.
To take a picture.
It was just incredible. It was really scary, actually, because it came back, it did it about 3 times, and it was looking at me. I just couldn't believe that bit.
Yeah, there's a tremendous line from the novel that it showed me. So Catherine has an indelible technical quality to her work, where she is able to draw in simile and metaphor in a way that it rises, or it lifts the idiom. And one of the lines that I will not forget is, you were talking about one of the birds fanning out its tail feathers and then stretching with the pride of summer. And I just remember, I was like, oh, what an incredible way to phrase that. What a wonderful way to express, because then I could see clearly. And that's the true genius of, and I use that word very carefully, the genius of Catherine's work, and a part of Laird's work that is the ability to provide aspect to nature that makes it more than human, that makes it more than natural, supernatural, to use the most literal version of the word. It lifts. This to me is what expresses the height of clarity and the genius of a work. As Aristotle says, the more brilliant a thing is not in its complexity, but it's found in its simplicity. And both Catherine and Laird are able to do that, especially with setting. I could feel the old church. I could see the window that Catherine was creating, in the same way that every time, and it makes me so mad sometimes when I'm reading one of Laird's books, I'll be like, fuck, how are you so good at writing these landscapes? And then I'll try to do it in my own work. I'm like, fucking Laird would have done this so much better. But yeah, I cannot express enough just how incredibly capable that the two of them are in that aspect. So, sorry to go on and on about.
No, I mean, it's so funny to hear you authors, you 3, talk about the mechanical elements of each other's work. It's really just entertaining to sit and listen to it, because I don't read from a mechanical perspective at all, as Seth will know. Dark Heart is my slogan, horror with heart, is because I read from this heart place where I don't see any, like, because I read a lot of manuscripts that are uncorrected. So I don't read from any critical lens in the sense of like grammatical or editorial issues or whatever. Like, I'm reading from this place of wanting the horror to come in to my space and like literally destroy me. And all three of these authors have done it so effectively. Like Seth's character, William Daniels, like it's to the point where it's like, I feel like I could threaten Seth with, like, if you harm this character, I will hate you so bad. Like, I will hate you, and you will, and I will never talk to you again. And it's the same, like Catherine's Immortelle, which came out through Off Limits, was the same, where I just like the way that Catherine tells a story. Just, I'm so immersed in this place and in with these fictional lives where I'm just like, I'm there. Like, she just whisks me away out of my living room and to exactly where she wants me to be. And Laird, fucking the croning with Don and Michelle, like, I'm telling you right now, like, I wanted to like call you and be like, what were you thinking, like, this with this marriage? Like, I mean, you're just there with these people and you live this life that they're living, and it's just horrific. And I love it. I love every minute of it.
Right. And there is, so in talking about the technical aspect, you know, the Blackwell series is I'm trying to build something, and I don't want to sound too self-important, but it's important for me to say that I'm trying to build what is effectively the antithesis of the cosmic horror prevalence that's shown up in horror for the last 10 to 15 years. It started with Lovecraft's Revolution, where people started getting back into that. And then Victor Laval shows up with the Ballad of Black Tom and shows everybody how it was supposed to be done in the first place. And I feel like I want to build a counterpoint to that, to provide a balance, something that's more not cosmic horror, but it's cosmic romance, and romance in the sense of the original meaning of the word. Because I believe that people need that. From a technical writing perspective, I feel like people need both. There are times when people want to sink into the morass of the indifference of a dark and uncaring universe, which is an absolute truth of the cosmos in which we are living in. But then there is also something deeper, or not deeper. There is something equally powerful in that all we have is each other, and that each other means something that's greater than any singular person. And so from a technical quality, I mean, Catherine writes metaphors and similes. You're not going to find many people that do it better than her, if anyone, as I'm pouring this third glass of whiskey here. But and I'll say this. So for those who haven't read the Isaiah Coleridge trilogy that Laird put out through Putnam, you should absolutely go out and buy them and read them. In Laird's second book, Black Mountain, the book opens with this incredible description of the landscape, the ice, the cold, harsh frontier of Alaska that can only exist inside of people's nightmares, but that is a very real place. And Laird goes on, he describes that these characters are with their hunting rifles. They're looking out at this herd. And he describes the rifles, he describes the men, and he describes the herd. And then he hits you with an incredibly technical paragraph break. And he says, we weren't there for them. And it immediately informs the malintent for the characters involved. It immediately informs the reader. And that carrier return is what does it all. It's the technical aspect of the break there that does everything for the first paragraph. So I'm just incredibly fortunate, to be living in the time as these two writers and to have them as peers. It's incredible.
Hey, Steph, there was a few questions before we get to the 1 hour mark. I wanted to make sure that somebody asked about an audio book, and Rob is also in the chat with Dark Matter Magazine, so this is an important question. Will there be audio books of Blackwell's, and will Seth narrate?
So yes and yes. I originally did the full audiobook version of the original version. However, Marissa's edits so elevated the book and changed specific word uses that make the book so much more powerful that I plan on re-recording All These Subtle Deceits. And I have an agreement with Dark Hart that I am able to do the audiobook versions. Not out of a sense of that I'm better than other people. I just feel like reading them in my voice or having my voice read them with the inflection, it provides an extra layer to the book. So the answer is yes, there will be an audiobook version. I'm working very hard on it with my friend Joe, and I'll do all 5 of the books.
I just realized when I said someone asked, it's Greg. Greg,
of course it is.
This is your account, right, Greg? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is, I'm sure. Right? Doesn't he have a podcast called
I think he does.
Okay.
I believe so.
There was a couple other questions too from your Twitter feed.
Mm-hmm.
We might have covered Marissa is your editor. And I felt like we definitely need to give some attention to Marissa's question. She wants to know the origin story of how you came to start wanting to write Blackwell's, and also if you have a writer's routine and what that looks like.
So I'll start with the routine. So like I said, I'm a normal person. I have a normal 40 to 50 hour a week job. But every day at 3 o'clock Central Standard Time or Central Daylight Time, from 3 to 6:30, I'm writing. That's every day. I write every day. I don't want to sound pompous about that. I don't mean to, but I write every day because I'm a writer, or I'm a person of routine. Routine matters an enormous amount to me, especially when the heat of the novel is at its highest and I throw myself at it. The characters just start doing everything for you. The plot falls into place. I'm a little bit of a plotter, but I don't like to plot a whole lot because I feel like that inhibits the characters to do what they're going to do, to make the mistakes that they're going to make. And that's why Sadie sometimes gets mad at me when things happen to characters because of decisions that they have made. And she'll get very mad and she'll say, "You did this." And I'm like, "No, the characters made this decision."
I don't like that.
But Blackwell's is a city out of place and out of time. It exists as sort of the city that America forgot. The Asalot Mountain Range is not a real place. For those of you who have great, geography skills, you'll know that the Asalot Mountain Range is not, in fact, in northwestern Colorado. Blackwell's exists as this type of, I don't want to say that. It exists as a place where the scales of everything that is important to us can be weighed. And it came about because I got tired of, and this comes from Laird's advice that he gave to me, is I sent initially during our friendship, I sent Laird a bunch of short stories. And I said, "Well, I want to be a novelist." And Laird was like, "Okay, well, then stop writing all these short stories. If you want to be a novelist, you got to start writing novels." And he was right in that there are certain technical tools and skills that only come about by practicing that particular medium. And so I started working on this idea that I had. The original Blackwell story that I wrote was called A First Date in Blackwell's, and it's in my short story collection, Minotaur. And I realized that there was this place that it was a city of secrets. It was a city of indescribable evil and angels and demons and blood and terror. And I wanted to write about that place. I've always wanted to have a place I could call my own, much in the same way that King has taken over Maine, or in the way that Lovecraft's work so well encompasses much of Rhode Island. And I wanted to have that kind of place. I wanted to make a fictional place where people could go, where they could escape, where they could find themselves and find heroes and enemies, but also where they could find themselves and find a place where we could examine spiritual horror, not in a safe space, because Blackwell's is not a safe space and it is not a real place, but it is a very true place. And a thing doesn't have to be real in order for it to be true. And that's where Blackwell's came from. William Daniels came from, an amalgamation of many separate things. And I knew that I wanted him to be a central figure in that. And as I started writing the stories, I realized that there are so many people living in this city. How can I not tell these other stories? And that's why all the prospect around us it's not so much a standalone story, but and it's not a prologue either. It's its own self-contained story that deals with possession without demons, but with demons. But it's more about how we possess the people that we love, how we care about them, and what happens when they choose to dispossess us. So if that answers that question.
Blackwell's is kind of a crucible. It's sort of how I sort of, the feeling I got from the overall setting, not the novel itself, but it's a place where you're taxed in a way, or you're put under certain pressure. It also reminds me a little bit of, when you talk about a little bit of Fantasy Island, the original, and the darker Fantasy Island. The first few episodes were actually very, very dark. Yeah. And this is different than that, obviously. It's more of a whiff of that, or a feeling like there's the phantom of it. But yeah, the crucible is the word that kind of comes to my mind when I think about what Blackwell's represents as a place.
Right.
Yeah, and Seth, next year, Cemetery Dance will be releasing your Western trilogy,
right?
Which I have also read, because I mean, people in the audience. Let me just tell you straight up. After I read The Threadbare Prince, which is not published, I asked him, "Well, what else do you have?" And I don't remember the exact order, but I read the short story collection Minotaur. I read two of the Westerns are published, and I read the unpublished one as well. But yeah, just keep giving me stuff. And I just do that sometimes. I want to just binge an author. I don't know if anybody else does that, but I'll just binge one author for a season. But yeah, so can you just really briefly talk about those Westerns? Because just from my perspective, these characters are also very ingrained in my reader's heart now. So,
Sadie was wonderful enough to ask to read those books. There's a Western horror adventure trilogy that I wrote that was originally called the Survivors Trilogy. That's sort of being workshopped right now, if that's what we're going to call it. It was purchased. All 3 books were purchased by Cemetery Dance. Kevin Lucy, I'm very appreciative of them there. And I'm currently working on the edits for them. But those books exist as a kind of, not introduction, but they're all 8 of these books, the 5 that'll come out through Dark Hart and the 3 horror Westerns, they all represent this cumulative octet of stories that will ultimately fulfill what I believe to be probably the capstone of the first section of my body of work. But the Survivors Trilogy is about a group of people who are trying to make it through the dark mythology the American West. It does not play to the traditional roles of the American cowboy, but it places at the center of the narrative this family struggling in West Texas. And it represents, it's probably the height of the cosmic romance that I was talking about how people matter and we shouldn't be so goddamn afraid to love each other because we're afraid. And I think that these 8 books that are going to be coming out from now until the end of 2023, they represent a hope from me, a hope that people can find. I always like to think of it this way, that when people are struggling inside of darkness and horror and terror, the only way to find those people and help those people is to go into those dark places. And all 8 of these books go into that dark place with a lantern, calling out people's names, saying, your joy matters, you matter, people matter. And so I'm very appreciative of Cemetery Dance for picking up those 3 books, and for Sadie for championing them so vehemently. So that's not brief. I'm not a brief talker, as they say. I'm sorry.
Was brief for you. That was good. You did good. Yeah. So I mean, we are at the hour mark. I don't want to take up too much of anyone's time tonight. And I just want to really quickly talk about if there's anything that Catherine or Laird, anything that you have that you want to celebrate. Also, like something new or something that you want to celebrate.
Yeah.
What can we celebrate with you right now? Go ahead, Catherine. We'll go with you first.
Well, this year has been the year of short stories for me, really. I haven't had any longer work published this year, but I've been really lucky with having professional level short stories accepted. So I've got one coming in, Human Monsters, which I'm still pinching myself about. That was based on, for those of you who don't know, I was a teacher for, I'm trying to think, 28 years. So that one, as Rob says, is called Monster Misunderstood. And it's sort of based on a child that I taught. I have a Baba Yaga story coming out with Black Spot Books. Yeah, Into the Forest, the anthology that's out soon. I've just had one with Alien Head Press, a sort of Welsh Halloween story. I got one coming out with Dark Murmurs, the anthology is called Dark Murmurs with Silent House Press. There's another one that I'm missing at the moment. I've just had my first ever sci-fi story published with Dark Matter in issue 11. So it's been a year of short stories for me, but next year I have my novella Mosaic with Sadie with Dark Hart. I have a gothic horror novel, very much sort of psychological suspense, being published with Nose Touch Press. That's set around 1900 in a little Welsh seaside town. And I have a YA sort of crossover novel coming out next year with Bridget's Gate, which is actually set right here in this house and in the surrounding lane. That's called The Wolf and the Favour, and it features a little girl who has Down syndrome.
Ooh.
Wonderful.
But those long work coming out next year.
Yeah, I love to hear it. Laird, what about you? What do you have coming around the bend?
Stacks and stacks of things, but lots of short fiction. And my agent I just handed her my next collection, so she's going to be looking for somebody to purchase that. But I'd rather talk about stuff I've been reading. I'm going to get their name wrong. I apologize. I've never heard it pronounced, but Joe Koch did Convulsate. Is it Koch?
That's what I've been saying.
Right, that's how I read it, yeah.
I pronounce it a different way every time. I'm sorry, Joe, but stellar writing. Haley Piper's new
No God's-
novel.
No
for
God's Drowning. Yeah.
Wow.
It's really is starting to receive some acclaim, and I'm glad to see that. Joe's, by the way, the Convulsive is a collection that came out earlier this year. Attila Veris has a collection coming out, The Black Maybe. That's super. Just it reminds me of a cross between. It obviously the writer is indebted to. Yes, it's chilling, and it's indebted to Ligotti, Paget, maybe Aikman, but less so Aikman, I think. More Ligotti and Brian Evans and writers like that will put you in that very dark, very cynical, very I'd say harsh, but creepy as all get out. So those are some books that I would highly recommend. J. Todd Scott, I believe, has a new novel coming out. He's a great crime novelist. You should just check. I'm actually sort of a champion of authors as much as I am books. And John Langan is a really dear friend of mine, but I don't think gets nearly the credit or acclaim he deserves. He has a new collection, Corpse Mouth, is out. Yeah. Paul Tremblay has a collection coming out in 2023, and obviously he had the novel. I haven't had a chance to read that novel with the Paul Bearers Club, but I would highly recommend Tremblay and Langan, two good friends of mine, but are also part of the reason that we're friends is because I admired their writing so much years ago, and they've only gotten. They've just gotten better and better every year. Yeah. So those are just a handful of books that I would. And there's two others. Split Scream by Carson Winter and Scott J. Moses. I read that recently, and what it is, it's two novelettes. I think each one's probably 8,000 to 12,000 words. I wasn't. They're shorter than novellas, but they're longer than a short story. And basically, they're both. I think the publisher is going to be releasing a few of those. Really, really cool. One's Winters is a Lovecraftian, real horrific Clive Barker Lovecraftian kind of thing, and the other one is sort of a post-apocalyptic, but beyond that, like a far future Lee Brackett kind of a science fiction horror story. Couldn't recommend those more. And also one last, I did the introduction for an anthology that either is coming out any minute now or it's already out. It Was All a Dream. Bad horror tropes done right.
Yeah.
It's got Gabino Iglesias, Aaron Brown. There's just Gemma Files, a ton of really well-established names in there, and a bunch of people that maybe are less established that brought their A game. That's a really fun and well done anthology, and I was really happy to have been asked to do a brief intro for it. So
it's wonderful.
Those are some recommendations for everybody out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, Seth's book birthday is sharing a book birthday with Brian. Is it McCauley?
Oh, the Reaper. Or
I'm sorry. It's like the first time you say a name out loud, you see it.
Right.
His Reaper, Curse of the Reaper.
Right.
Also, Rachel Harrison's book, Sharp Teeth, and also Aaron E. Adams. The Jackal, or it could just be Jackal, but I read that also, and that was really good. Like a thriller, a missing persons kind of thriller that gets supernatural and weird. And then I just finished Gemma Amore's Full Immersion, which came out really recently too, and that was so good. We sent that out in a Nightworms package with Anybody Home by Michael Seidlinger, and both books were totally different and totally scary and really good.
You have an event with Michael this week?
Yeah, on Thursday in Seattle. I'm going to Third Place Books and be in conversation with Michael Seidlinger, so I'm really looking forward to that. And then Andy Davidson later on in the month for the Holokind, promoting the Holokind.
Davidson's really exceptionally skilled. He and I put him with Ballingrud and
John Horner Jacobs. Yep.
Well, yeah, John Horner has very much developed into a stylist. There's a Conrad over in England who has written some really cool stuff. Read Then Destroy collection. But there's Joel Lane. There's this handful, and actually primarily British authors for me, but who are students of the sentence level. They're very difficult to equal, and I feel like Brian Evans is another one. They're just magnificent at the sentence. I mean, they're every level, but it will slap you right in the face when you start reading Davidson compared to your typical prose. So,
absolutely. Cool. Andy Davidson's story in Human Monsters, like, you guys have to read it. There's something very haunting and just. I just reread his In the Valley of the Sun, and then I made my mom buy it. But it was like, it's so it's like the prose is so naked,
visceral.
Yeah, and at the same time, like, there's not a purple prose about or a flowery language about it, but it's just like in the way that he structures it, that is just like, fuck. I don't know what that guy's doing, but it's good.
The best way that I could put about Davidson's work is that he drives the noun. Every time he drives the noun. Like, the verbs are important, verbs matter, but he could give a fuck all about adjectives. And that's what makes his sentences so powerful, is that he writes driving the noun every time. It's why there's that connection between every single sentence. I think he's incredible.
Yeah, that's really good. I love hearing writers talk about other writers. It's great, because I'm just like, I don't know. Really I don't have the words, but you guys have the words. So that's really great.
It's funny, Sadie, that you said earlier, sorry,
no, go ahead.
You don't really sort of deconstruct as a reader while you're in the reading process. It's just all about heart. And I think I used to be the same until I wrote myself. And now I can't help but read with my editor's head on. It's a real pain.
Right. Right. It's something that Sadie and I have argued about before.
Like, don't tell me that stuff. I just want to.
So I wanted to, if we can, Sadie. So I appreciate everybody who has been here, who's been involved in the YouTube chat. I really appreciate all of the support today, which has been overwhelmingly just supportive and positive, and that means a lot for me. For someone who, like, I joke, like, I'm a relatively obscure Houstonian author. But one of the things I wanted to say is that, so All These Subtle Deceits comes out today. It's out today, and I hope that you enjoy it if you read it. There's another book coming out, and we've talked about it a little bit, which is All the Prospect Around Us. If y'all will allow me, I would like to read the cold open to All the Prospect Around Us, if that's okay.
Yes, and then we'll let everybody go about their business. But this is really important. It'll hook your readers.
So again, this is for the second book in the Blackwell series. This is the cold open, not so much a prologue, but I hope you enjoy it. From a crow's view, the road leading to Blackwell's Colorado is a winding trail that coils through a green expanse of spruce, pine, and alder. A narrow gray serpent slithering this way and that through a forest set in the shadow of a stone god known as the Astalot Mountain Range. From its peak, the range slopes precipitously, crescent-shaped, like the shattered bowl of some long-dead titan of myth. The city itself is an incongruous lattice of dark streets that delta into darker alleyways populated by the homeless, the infirm, and every other kind of societal detritus accumulated by human civilization. A city abundant in oil, minerals, and all manner of wealth that can be harvested from the dying corpus of the earth. Blackwell's, like other wealthy cities in America, has the fertile charms that shine in affluent veneer, and pains and sorrows and secrets. Secrets most of all. It is a city of demons and light, angels and blood, federalist slaves and their reclining masters robed in prodigal opulence. The buildings stand as one press of Art Deco architecture, a squash mass of stone that shines in the summertime sun and never more pristine when the winter snows swirl from the mountains to hide the soot-soiled facades. All this human crafted glory stands atop something older, something buried beneath the snow blanketed topsoil, and yet above the wells of oil from which the city derives its name. Below these spaces of the living, within an earthen tomb housing the immortal, exists a creature much older than Blackwell's, something ancient, an entity of voracious hunger. And that's the cold open for All the Prospect Around Us. So I hope y'all love it.
And I had shivers again when you read those first few sentences. So it took me straight back. I literally shuddered.
I love a cold
I
open.
know what's coming.
Well, thank you everyone for coming to our release book party launch day
Extravaganza.
extravaganza. I appreciate everyone for showing up. There was some familiar faces and some not so familiar faces, but it's really, really meaningful when the community rallies and supports one another. It feels really good. It feels very loving. And yeah, I just appreciate everyone showing up for that today. This will be a recorded broadcast, so if you missed it, you can come back and watch it anytime. It will be on the Nightworms YouTube channel. So thanks again to Nightworms. Thank you, Laird, for coming.
Absolutely.
Catherine, thank you for staying up way past your bedtime to be with us tonight. And Seth, congratulations and happy book birthday to All These Subtle Deceits, which is available now from Dark Hart Books.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Have a good night.